Hey guys, tonight we step into the thick, humid air of 17th century Paris, not the romantic one with cafes and moonlight strolls, but the original recipe. The version where perfume is practically a survival tool, streets smell like a mixture of soup bones and firewood, and your first mistake is breathing through your nose. You arrive not with a suitcase, but with the misfortune of modern hygiene habits. And it hits you instantly. Before you even step off the creaky carriage, your senses are ambushed: horse manure, rotting food, damp wool, body odor, and the unmistakable tang of stale chamber pot. Welcome to Rue de la Butte Keep-You, an actual street name which roughly translates to the Stink Hill. It's real. You're already gagging. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, what's your location and local time right now? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the early morning Paris mist. It should be romantic, cinematic even, but your boots stick to something that might be tallow, or worse. You pass a vendor hurling yesterday's cabbage into a street-side gutter while two dogs fight over what appears to be a rat's tail. The people around you don't notice. They're walking briskly, wrapped in layers of wool and linen, faces ruddy, eyes half shut like they've learned to survive this in a state of low awareness. You, on the other hand, are raw. Freshly microwaved in 21st century germophobia, unused to a time when bathing was considered radical and deodorant was, at best, a rumor. Your hotel, or rather, the spare room above a baker's oven, reeks of sourdough, candle smoke, and the body heat of guests long gone. There's a wash basin in the corner. You lift the jug beside it and sniff. It smells like it's been through several seasons and at least one dead pigeon. Here's the thing, 17th century Parisians are not dirty because they want to be. It's more like they don't agree with your entire concept of what clean means. Dirt is not evil. It's natural. Washing, on the other hand, is suspicious. Everyone knows too much water draws disease into the skin. Haven't you read the pamphlets? You decide to get some fresh air, again, mistake. The morning market is alive with noise, color, and an odor that punches like a wet sock in a leather glove. You spot a woman pouring what looks like laundry water onto the cobblestones. A man relieves himself against a wall, then politely tips his hat to you. No one blinks. Historians still argue whether early modern Paris was truly worse than other European cities or just more fragrant. The lack of a consistent sewer system, the habit of emptying chamber pots directly into the street, and the near-religious suspicion of bathing all contributed to a city that essentially marinated in itself. But here's the twist, people here think it's normal. They know where to walk, when to breathe shallowly, and which alleys to avoid after duck confit night. You, however, are a walking sponge of naivety and bad decisions. You wander into a courtyard and nearly step into what might be a dead cat, or possibly someone's dinner. You're too afraid to check. Your first meal doesn't help. You try the local fare, a modest meat pie, only to realize your fork is communal and probably hasn't been washed since the reign of Henry IV. The pie is interesting. It smells like warm butter and disappointment. You take a bite, then try not to imagine where the crust's grain was milled or how the cook cleaned their hands. A peddler sidles up to you. He's selling what he calls freshening waters, tiny glass bottles of lavender and ammonia that you're supposed to dab on your wrist to combat street smells. You dab too generously. Now you smell like a funeral wreath. Across town, a priest preaches that filth protects the soul from vanity. He gestures grandly, his armpits damp with something ominous. You slowly back away, trying not to inhale. And as you pass a gaggle of noble women delicately waving scented kerchiefs, you realize even they are playing defense. Under their powdered wigs and embroidered bodices lies the same sweaty humanity, just better disguised. You retreat to your room, scrape your boots, and lie down fully clothed. There's a scratchy wool blanket, and underneath it, a straw mattress that smells of mildew and ancestry. You roll over, eye stinging, brain buzzing with one clear thought. You are not surviving. This not because of war or plague or poverty, but because your soft modern nose was never built for the symphony of sour, burnt, herbal, animal, and smoky that is old Paris. You miss hand sanitizer. You miss Febreze. You miss the idea of air that doesn't cling to you like soup grease. And this is only the beginning. Tomorrow, you'll learn that bathing is more dangerous than a duel. But for now, you close your eyes. Outside, a cat yowls. Somewhere below, a cart rolls through slush and fish bones. And you try, very hard, not to breathe through your nose. You wake up coughing. It's not dramatic, just a soft tickle at the back of your throat, like you've swallowed a cloud of dust that someone's been aging in a wine cellar. Your eyes open to a dim beam of light fighting its way through stained linen curtains. The air in the room is dense. You swear it has texture. You sit up, slowly, as though trying not to disturb whatever fungal spirit lives in the mattress. Your clothes are damp. Not from rain or sweat, just the general Parisian air saturation, a kind of ambient stickiness that's part fog, part human output. There's a silver bowl of yesterday's water on the washstand, now rimmed with a yellow film you're pretty sure wasn't there when you fell asleep. You sniff it. Still a bad idea. Time to clean up? Not so fast. It's the 1600s, and here's the grim news: public baths have been shut down. All of them. Not just because they were occasionally brothels in disguise, though they absolutely were. The real reason? Plague. And sin. And doctors being absolutely convinced that warm water makes your skin porous, and therefore vulnerable to death. You stumble down to the street and ask the baker's assistant if there's a bathhouse nearby. He looks at you the way someone might look at a man who's just asked where to find a convenient guillotine. "Eh, what?" he asks, half laughing. "A bain public?" "No, monsieur, those are for the Turks." That's not a compliment. In fact, the Ottoman Empire still keeps bathhouses, which Parisians see as exotic, strange, and vaguely suspicious. You, a time traveler with slightly greasy bangs and an unshakable desire for hand soap, are now officially foreign. It's not a good look. Bathhouses used to be popular in medieval Europe. People would gather, bathe together, chat, flirt, sometimes even eat while soaking like confused soup ingredients. But by the 17th century, that was all but gone, replaced by fear. Fear of disease. Fear of impropriety. Fear that washing too much made you weak, effeminate, or dead. A royal edict in 1606 had already started closing communal baths under the excuse of moral hygiene. And after several outbreaks of plague, the general belief became, water carries illness. Public bathhouses? Disease soup. Even touching a tub outside your own home was seen as reckless. Don't wet the skin, chirps a popular medical guide of the era. You may let the devil in. Historians still argue whether this was purely superstition or if there was a twisted logic behind it. After all, unfiltered river water was a pretty solid cocktail of bacteria, sewage, and decomposing livestock. The Seine, for example, was the city's main drinking source and garbage dump. Bathing in that would be like cleaning your teeth with caramelized mold. So what do people do instead? They don't. Or at least, they adjust their definition of bathing. A noble might wash their hands and face with scented cloths. A peasant might sponge themselves with vinegar. But the full body soak? That's a luxury bordering on madness. You ask a merchant where he gets clean, and he gestures to his underclothes with a smirk. "I change shirts, monsieur. The linen takes the dirt." That is what linen is for. It's true. Linen is absorbent, white, breathable, and it acts as your body's dry cleaning service. You wear a fresh shirt, sweat into it, then discard it, perhaps not daily, but often enough to fool your neighbors. Soap, if used, is mild and generally applied only to the hands or feet. Hair? Best left powdered and undisturbed. You hear someone shout down the street, hawking rose water for the hair, and alum stones for the armpits. It's not bathing, but it's something. You watch a noblewoman gently dab her wrists with a cloth soaked in orange blossom extract, then step gracefully over what appears to be a pile of spoiled eels. Grace is all about choreography. And here's the twist: people smell. Terribly. But since everyone smells, no one notices. Or rather, they notice, but they weaponize it. Scent becomes class-coded. If you reek of sweat and fish oil, you're a laborer. If you reek of clove, civet, and something resembling overripe peaches rolled in musk, congratulations, you're upper class. You realize there's no such thing as clean here, only of acceptable levels of fragrance. You're judged not on how little you smell, but how intentionally you smell. So when you finally do find a copper bathtub, tucked away behind a curtain in a wealthy friend's townhouse, you pause. It looks inviting. Steam curls from its surface. There's even a bundle of herbs tied together with twine floating lazily on top. But you hesitate. Because now you have doubts. What if the water's been reused? What if it's river water, just boiled and strained through a sock? What if someone was sick and now you'll catch it through your pores? You blink. You've internalized 17th century hygiene logic in less than 24 hours. You've become one of them. And so you back away from the tub slowly, respectfully, like it's a sleeping bear. You pick up a clean linen shirt instead. You shake it out. You sniff it, lavender. Sharp, overwhelming, slightly burnt. You pull it on and suddenly feel cleaner. Just like they intended. You decide, foolishly, that if a proper bath is off the table, maybe you can freshen up the modern way, with a little rinse, perhaps a bucket over the head in some quiet courtyard. After all, your scalp feels like it's been lacquered with chimney soot and butter. You've started scratching your neck absent-mindedly. Something is growing, you're certain of it. Possibly sentient. You find a public pump tucked between a tanner's shop and a churchyard wall. The pump is gurgling ominously, as if warning you, this is not Evian. The handle groans as you work it, and the water that gushes out is opaque with something you'd rather not identify. Bits of gravel? Ash? Soap from a previous user? A centuries-old curse? You cup the water in your hands and splash it on your face. It feels cold. Sharp. Metallic. And then it hits you, this is sane water. Raw. Unfiltered. Liquid roulette. You cough. A child watching you from the doorway of a fishmonger's giggles. He whispers something to his sister. You're pretty sure the phrase included the word idiot. You back away from the pump with the gravity of someone who has just narrowly avoided spiritual contamination. Your face is wetter but not cleaner. You smell like wet iron and regret. The truth settles in like a damp cloak: there is no safe, private place to wash in this city unless you're wealthy, well-connected, or just extremely brave. And that brings you to your next fateful idea. Maybe the river? It's a common fantasy, even for people in the 1600s. Paris is built on the Seine, after all, with bridges stretching like weary arms across its grey-green flow. The water looks calm from a distance, romantic even, but only because you can't smell it from where you're standing. You walk closer, trying to blend in. You notice a few washerwomen near the banks, vigorously beating clothes against rocks, dunking them with a rhythm that's part musical, part threatening. You admire their dedication until you see the floating debris nearby. Is that a shoe? A chicken carcass? A whole wig? A gentleman strolls by, sniffing the air dramatically. Ah, the Seine, he says to no one in particular. A perfume of civilization. You nearly gag. Let's be clear, the Seine is not a river. It's a liquid timeline of waste disposal. Everything goes in. Everything. Household slop, tannery runoff, dead animals, abandoned personal belongings, laundry soap, rotten vegetables, bodily fluids, yes, all of them. It's the original one-stop shop for your plumbing needs. Historians still argue whether Parisians of the time truly believed the Seine could clean anything. Some argue it was just convenience, others point to a religious element, a sort of water is purifying no matter what mindset. but you're starting to suspect it was mostly apathy marinated in denial. And yet, people still drink it. That's right. Many Parisians drink the Seine. Boiled, if they're cautious. Straight, if they're brave, or ill-informed. The city doesn't have a centralized clean water system, so you drink what you can carry, what you can beg, or what drips into your barrels from a questionable rooftop gutter. You watch a man carefully fill a clay jug, splash some on his face, and chug the rest. He catches your eye and winks. Good for the teeth, he says. You back away slowly. Back in the cramped room above the bakery, you consider what counts as hygiene in this world. Your skin itches. Your scalp tingles. You're developing what can only be described as a relationship with your own smell. You begin to understand why 17th century perfumers were basically emergency responders. Speaking of which, you discover a tiny shop labeled Parfumerie de l'Évêché. You duck inside. It's dim, cool, and overwhelmingly fragrant, like being hugged by a lavender bush that's also on fire. Bottles of every shape and hue line the walls. The shopkeeper, a rail-thin man with stained gloves and a perpetually furrowed brow, welcomes you without eye contact. He assumes, quite reasonably, that you stink. He offers you a tester of Eau de Saint Denis, which smells like crushed rosemary mixed with something vaguely chemical. Very fashionable, he says. Hides the sins of the skin. You buy it out of fear. It turns out perfume isn't just about smelling nice. It's medicinal. A protective cloud. A scented aura that supposedly repels disease and bad humors. People carry small pouches of herbs called pomanders, or wear jewelry that can be dabbed with perfume to guard their nostrils from offensive vapors, known as miasma, the airborne source of plague, according to the best medical minds of the era. Of course, this doesn't work. But it makes you feel better. You wear your new scent like armor. And suddenly, no one gives you weird looks. Your unwashed hair? Masked by bergamot. Your stale shirt? Cloaked in myrrh. Your confused, panicked modern soul? Swaddled in jasmine. You still itch. But now, you smell expensive while doing it. You've accepted a few hard truths. You will not be bathing today. Possibly not tomorrow. Possibly not until this whole 17th century vacation is over and you can sprint back to a world of hot showers, shampoo, and reliable plumbing. Still, you need to try something. Anything. Your skin feels like it's wearing a costume made of old cheese and disappointment. So, like many a Parisian in this stinky golden age, you turn to the trusted art of dry washing. It's not as bad as it sounds. Dry washing, as it turns out, is more performance than process. You remove your shirt, vigorously shake it out the window, sending a small puff of dust and what may have been a sleeping flea down into the street, and then rub yourself down with a rag dampened in vinegar and floral water. It burns slightly, and the vinegar smell makes you think of pickles, which honestly feels more appetizing than the scent you've been wearing all day. Your host, a widow with an enviably fresh face and suspiciously glowing skin, watches approvingly. She offers you a handful of crushed mint and instructs you to rub it behind your ears. It wakes the blood, she says, nodding. You're not sure what that means, but you comply. For science. Then she hands you a powder puff. For the armpits. You've never powdered your armpits before. But by now, you trust her. And so, you spend your morning going through the ritual of a bathless bath, wiping, patting, powdering, perfuming. You even clean under your nails with a sliver of bone carved into a tiny scraper. By the end of it, you feel acceptable. You smell like a medicinal herb garden that's recently hosted a barbecue, but hey, progress. This is the routine for most Parisians in your era, especially the middle and upper classes. Water is suspect, soap is a tool of moderation, and linen is life. In fact, you learn that the wealthier households rotate through dozens of shirts and chemises, some change daily, some twice a day, because it's the cloth that cleans you, not the water. Historians still debate how much this linen theory actually worked. Did people really stay cleaner by sweating into a fresh shirt every morning? Or did they just smell slightly less offensive for a few hours until the lice caught on again? Ah yes. The lice. You've been ignoring it, hoping it wouldn't come to this. But the itch on the back of your neck isn't just psychological. You've got company. The widow nods sympathetically when you mention it. They're very fond of travelers, she says, and hands you a fine-toothed knit comb carved from ivory. Comb gently. Over the basin. And don't scream. You don't scream. But you do gasp. It's a lot. You think of yourself as a clean person. Back home, you shower daily, brush twice, floss when you remember. You never imagined having to extract a literal ecosystem from your scalp. And yet here you are, combing with slow resignation, watching the comb populate with the tiniest, most horrifying proof that nature always wins. You're not alone, either. Lice, fleas, and bed bugs are part of the cast in this particular century. Nobles carry little silver scratchers, charmingly called flea catchers, to deal with their unwanted guests during long sermons or dinner parties. Even the king is rumored to have a lice valet, a man whose entire job is to handle the royal scalp situation with discretion and tweezers. And let's not forget the lower classes, who are less likely to have perfumed powders or spare shirts. They rely on scratching, swatting, and the occasional brutal head shave to keep things manageable. You're tempted to shave your head. But in this era, that's practically a billboard for "I just had typhus." Plus, you've seen the wigs. Wigs are their own category of danger. By now, you've noticed them everywhere. Powdered, towering, some with curls so elaborate you suspect an entire small animal could hide inside. And that's not far off. Wigs aren't just fashion statements, they're strategic cover-ups. If your real hair is patchy, dirty, or crawling, you throw on a wig, powder it within an inch of its life, and go about your day. But here's the kicker, wigs are often stuffed with padded frames and tied with glue or wax. They're hard to clean. And once lice get in, well, let's just say they stay a while. You meet a young dandy at a local cafe who proudly tips his hat to you and adjusts his wig with a flourish. It smells like clove and talc and old bread. He tells you he once lost a small ring inside it for a week. You stare at him, uncertain whether to be impressed or terrified. At some point, you think back to your modern life, where lice is an emergency, not an accessory. Where your worst hygiene sin is skipping deodorant on a weekend. You wonder, how did anyone survive this century with their dignity intact? The answer is, they redefined dignity. It's not about being perfectly clean. It's about knowing the dance, when to powder, when to dab, when to pretend the itching is just thoughtful scratching. You adapt. You don't complain too loudly. You find a way to make this all feel normal. And the strangest part? It starts to work. By the end of the day, you've fully integrated your bathless rituals into your routine. You powder your collar. You dab rosewater on your temples. You scrape your nails and rinse your linen shirt in a trickle of cleanish water from the roof spout. You smell faintly of vinegar and mint. You're still itchy, but you've stopped flinching every time something crawls. You've become Parisian. Or at least, just clean enough to walk into a church without causing alarm. You stretch. You breathe. You swat at something on your leg that might be imagination, or might not. You dream of soap. At this point, you've fully internalized the Parisian paradox. You can be clean without water, and filthy without realizing it. You've accepted the lice, the perfume, the powder, the way everyone avoids direct eye contact while scratching discreetly. But still, something's missing. That primal human craving to actually feel clean. Not powdered, not scented. Not disguised. Clean. And so, with a mix of hope and desperation, you ask the widow about actual baths. Not the trickle from the pump. Not a bucket rinse. You want a real, honest-to-God sit-down soak. A tub. Steam. Maybe even a scrub. She stares at you like you've asked to borrow her soul. People don't really do that anymore, she says, as if discussing a banned religion. Not since the Troubles. The old bathhouses are mostly shut down. Dirty places, they said. Dangerous. You push a little. There must be somewhere. Finally, with the solemnity of someone giving directions to Mauder, she whispers a name, BetterSlp. It's not officially open, but the proprietor might let you in for the right price. And if you don't look too closely at the clientele. This is how you end up at the door of what was once a thriving Parisian public bathhouse, a relic of earlier centuries when communal bathing was seen as not just hygienic, but virtuous. Inspired by Roman traditions, these bathhouses had been everywhere, until recently. See, here's the thing. People used to love baths. In the Middle Ages, even modest towns had etuves, public steamy baths, social hubs where people washed, chatted, flirted, did business, and sometimes got a little too cozy. But by the 17th century, public opinion had shifted hard. Bathhouses became synonymous with immorality, disease, and sin. The growing belief was that water opened the pores, which then allowed in bad airs, miasmas, the supposed carriers of disease. Clean skin was dangerous skin. You were safer, people argued, with your dirt intact. Historians still debate how much of this fear was based in disease outbreaks and how much was a convenient excuse to clamp down on bathhouses as sites of vice. Either way, most were shut, repurposed, or left to rot. But a few linger, like BetterSlp. You step inside, and the air hits you like a wet sock. It's humid, close, and scented faintly with lavender, mildew, and smoked ham? You're not sure. The proprietor eyes you, then ushers you toward the lukewarm room, which is named more for its moral neutrality than its temperature. The tub is stone. Deep. Chipped around the edges. A young servant fills it with buckets from a steaming copper kettle, no plumbing here. You're instructed to undress behind a cracked screen, wrap yourself in a threadbare linen, and step in slowly. You do. And it's glorious. It's not hot, but it's warm enough. The heat leaches into your bones like an apology. You relax for the first time in days. You don't even care that the water smells faintly of boiled turnip. But of course, nothing this good comes without a price. First, the water is reused. Not just from bath to bath, but often within the same session. If two people arrive close together, they might be asked to share. You hear the shuffle of feet outside and immediately sit up straighter. Not today. Second, the cleaning instruments. A wooden scrubber. A sack of coarse salt. A bar of soap the size and texture of an old potato. You try them all. The salt stings. The soap leaves a waxy film. But your skin, your actual skin, feels cleaner than it has all week. Then comes the awkward part. The cool-down room. Apparently, it's bad form to go straight from warm to street. Something about your humors. So you're directed to sit on a hard bench wrapped in a wool blanket while sipping thin herbal tea. A toothless woman across from you belches. You nod politely. She winks. You stay until your fingertips wrinkle and your soul has partially returned to your body. As you dress, the proprietor offers you a small cloth packet tied with string, herbs, he says, to put in your hat and keep the bath scent near your brain. Keeps the devils out. You're not convinced about the devils. But you take it anyway. Back outside, the street is loud. Wet. Alive. A fish cart trundles past, sloshing something ominous onto your shoes. But you're calm. Centered. Slightly damp. You survived the forbidden bath. That night, you sleep like a boiled onion. But by morning, you itch again. Because here's the final, terrible truth, one bath isn't enough. Not in this city. Not in this century. Your linen shirt reabsorbs the sweat of your walk. Your powdered armpits betray you by lunch. The sweet herbal note in your hair is no match for a single gust of air near the butcher's alley. Cleanliness here isn't a goal. It's a battle. And you, brave traveler, have just begun. You've bathed. You've powdered. You've scratched and salted and tiptoed your way around the parasite situation. You've earned a modest badge of honor for simply not fleeing the century entirely. But now, my weary time traveler, you must confront the true test of hygiene in 17th century Paris. The toilet problem. You're probably hoping this will be a quick detour. A short discussion, maybe a few awkward chuckles, and then we'll move on. But oh, no. This is the main attraction. Because while skipping a bath can be rationalized, and lice can be combed away, eventually, relieving oneself in Paris during this period is an ordeal of daily absurdity, danger, and deeply creative workarounds. Let's begin with a basic fact: there are no toilets. Not as you know them. No flush, no privacy, no designated men's and women's signs with neat little stick figures. There are chamber pots, and there are windows. You wake up on a dewy Paris morning, stretch your itchy limbs, and feel the familiar pressure in your lower belly. Your instincts say, bathroom. But your host just yawns, reaches under her bed, and pulls out a pot. Earthenware. Modestly decorated with a blue tulip. She sets it on the floor with a thud and leaves the room. You stare at it. It's small. No seat. No lid. No dignity. But you use it. Carefully. You cover it with a scrap of cloth, mostly to keep your pride from leaking out. You look around for a place to dispose of it. And then you remember the window. She had mentioned this casually last night, right before dinner. In the morning, just empty it out the shutters. Yell first, of course. Yes. That's the system. Paris, in all its elegance and grandeur, still largely runs on a public sanitation method best described as scream and splash. You take your chamber pot to the open window. You lean out carefully. You clear your throat and bellow. Gare ello. Beware the water. This is your legal warning cry, required before throwing your contribution into the street. If you forget, and someone below gets an unexpected morning blessing, you could be fined. Or beaten with a broom. Or sued. You toss. It lands somewhere with a splat. You do not investigate further. The smell rises moments later. Faint, but inescapable. This is normal. Streets in Paris during this time are paved with mud, manure, straw, and despair. Gutter channels run along the center or sides, meant to carry waste toward the river. But these channels often clog, flood, or simply refuse to help. And so, the city stinks. You think this might be an exaggeration. Until you walk down Rue des Lombards and slide, on something slick. Your shoes now wear Paris. Shoemakers, by the way, have invented raised wooden platforms, early galoshes, that strap over your shoes to keep them above the worst of the filth. They call them pattens. You see people wearing them with elegant lace and silk stockings, clip-clopping proudly through the mess like it's fashion week in a store. You want a pair. Badly. But you press on. You've got errands. And needs. Eventually, nature calls again. You're not at home this time. You're in a public square, thirsty and disoriented. Now what? You look for a public latrine, and good luck with that. Most were dismantled during the plague years. Too dangerous, said the authorities. Some cities tried to replace them with urine barrels, yes, literal barrels nailed to posts where men could relieve themselves. You spot one behind a tavern. A sad wooden bucket that smells like ambition and defeat. You decide against it. Women, you notice, have even fewer options. Most simply carry small chamber pots under their skirts, called bordeloos, and excuse themselves discreetly behind a cart or wall. It sounds scandalous, but it's practically elegant in execution. You've never seen someone pee so gracefully. Still, not all is chaos. The wealthy, of course, have their solutions. You visit a well-to-do merchant's home and are shown a close stool, essentially a fancy wooden chair with a pot hidden beneath a cushioned seat. It has embroidered armrests. There's even a little bell to summon a servant to clean it. You wonder briefly if this is better or worse than the chamber pot by the bed. Worse, probably, if you're the servant. Speaking of which, the real heroes of Parisian sanitation are the vidanges, night soil men who roam the alleys in the dark with carts and barrels, collecting the city's waste from cesspits, cellars, and unlucky sidewalks. Their job is so foul, so physically punishing, that they're paid almost as well as a good tailor. You never see them directly. You just hear the slosh of their barrels, the creak of wheels, the occasional gag in the darkness. And then there's the Seine. It sparkles at sunset. It feeds the city with its beauty. And yes, it's also a toilet, laundry, and garbage disposal all in one. You watch a woman wash her vegetables on one bank while a man relieves himself 10 feet upstream. A fish jumps. You lose your appetite. Historians still argue whether the sanitation problem in Paris was truly worse than in other cities of the time. London certainly had its share of cesspits and nightmen. But few cities matched the density, the height, and the volume of human activity that Paris crammed into its ancient medieval layout. This makes every trip outside a gamble. Every alley a roulette wheel of "what's that smell?" Every moment a meditation on the resilience of the human nose. And yet, somehow, people carry on. They dine. They flirt. They write poetry. They toss their pots from upper windows like it's just another Tuesday, and somehow, no one drops dead from sheer mortification. You start to adapt, too. You carry a scented handkerchief. You breathe through your mouth near taverns. You learn to recognize the sound of Gare Hello and step quickly. You survive the toilet problem. But you never quite forgive it. You've bathed. You've powdered. You've scratched and salted and tiptoed your way around the parasite situation. You've earned a modest badge of honor for simply not fleeing the century entirely. But now, my weary time traveler, you must confront the true test of hygiene in 17th century Paris. The toilet problem. You're probably hoping this will be a quick detour. A short discussion, maybe a few awkward chuckles, and then we'll move on. But oh, no. This is the main attraction. Because while skipping a bath can be rationalized, and lice can be combed away, eventually, relieving oneself in Paris during this period is an ordeal of daily absurdity, danger, and deeply creative workarounds. Let's begin with a basic fact: there are no toilets. Not as you know them. No flush, no privacy, no designated men's and women's signs with neat little stick figures. There are chamber pots, and there are windows. You wake up on a dewy Paris morning, stretch your itchy limbs, and feel the familiar pressure in your lower belly. Your instincts say, bathroom. But your host just yawns, reaches under her bed, and pulls out a pot. Earthenware. Modestly decorated with a blue tulip. She sets it on the floor with a thud and leaves the room. You stare at it. It's small. No seat. No lid. No dignity. But you use it. Carefully. You cover it with a scrap of cloth, mostly to keep your pride from leaking out. You look around for a place to dispose of it. And then you remember the window. She had mentioned this casually last night, right before dinner. In the morning, just empty it out the shutters. Yell first, of course. Yes. That's the system. Paris, in all its elegance and grandeur, still largely runs on a public sanitation method best described as scream and splash. You take your chamber pot to the open window. You lean out carefully. You clear your throat and bellow. Gare hello. Beware the water. This is your legal warning cry, required before throwing your contribution into the street. If you forget, and someone below gets an unexpected morning blessing, you could be fined. Or beaten with a broom. Or sued. You toss. It lands somewhere with a splat. You do not investigate further. The smell rises moments later. Faint, but inescapable. This is normal. Streets in Paris during this time are paved with mud, manure, straw, and despair. Gutter channels run along the center or sides, meant to carry waste toward the river. But these channels often clog, flood, or simply refuse to help. And so, the city stinks. You think this might be an exaggeration. Until you walk down Rue des Lombards and slide, on something slick. Your shoes now wear Paris. Shoemakers, by the way, have invented raised wooden platforms, early galoshes, that strap over your shoes to keep them above the worst of the filth. They call them pattens. You see people wearing them with elegant lace and silk stockings, clip-clopping proudly through the mess like it's fashion week in a store. You want a pair. Badly. But you press on. You've got errands. And needs. Eventually, nature calls again. You're not at home this time. You're in a public square, thirsty and disoriented. Now what? You look for a public latrine, and good luck with that. Most were dismantled during the plague years. Too dangerous, said the authorities. Some cities tried to replace them with urine barrels, yes, literal barrels nailed to posts where men could relieve themselves. You spot one behind a tavern. A sad wooden bucket that smells like ambition and defeat. You decide against it. Women, you notice, have even fewer options. Most simply carry small chamber pots under their skirts, called bordaloos, and excuse themselves discreetly behind a cart or wall. It sounds scandalous, but it's practically elegant in execution. You've never seen someone pee so gracefully. Still, not all is chaos. The wealthy, of course, have their solutions. You visit a well-to-do merchant's home and are shown a close stool, essentially a fancy wooden chair with a pot hidden beneath a cushioned seat. It has embroidered armrests. There's even a little bell to summon a servant to clean it. You wonder briefly if this is better or worse than the chamber pot by the bed. Worse, probably, if you're the servant. Speaking of which, the real heroes of Parisian sanitation are the vidangers, night soil men who roam the alleys in the dark with carts and barrels, collecting the city's waste from cesspits, cellars, and unlucky sidewalks. Their job is so foul, so physically punishing, that they're paid almost as well as a good tailor. You never see them directly. You just hear the slosh of their barrels. The creak of wheels. The occasional gag in the darkness. And then there's the Seine. It sparkles at sunset. It feeds the city with its beauty. And yes, it's also a toilet, laundry, and garbage disposal all in one. You watch a woman wash her vegetables on one bank while a man relieves himself 10 feet upstream. A fish jumps. You lose your appetite. Historians still argue whether the sanitation problem in Paris was truly worse than in other cities of the time. London certainly had its share of cesspits and nightmen. But few cities matched the density, the height, and the volume of human activity that Paris crammed into its ancient medieval layout. This makes every trip outside a gamble. Every alley a roulette wheel of what's that smell? Every moment a meditation on the resilience of the human nose. And yet, somehow, people carry on. They dine. They flirt. They write poetry. They toss their pots from upper windows like it's just another Tuesday, and somehow, no one drops dead from sheer mortification. You start to adapt, too. You carry a scented handkerchief. You breathe through your mouth near taverns. You learn to recognize the sound of Gare Hello, and step quickly. You survive the toilet problem. But you never quite forgive it. Now that you've mastered the art of not dying from bread grit or rogue pickled eggs, let's turn to another essential part of Parisian life in the 17th century, entertainment. Yes, you're still itchy, mildly infected, and deeply suspicious of anything wet, but even the most plague-adjacent peasant needs a bit of fun. And Paris, for all its grime and gloom, delivers in its own chaotic, pungent, deeply theatrical way. So, what do you do for fun? Let's start with the obvious. The streets are alive. Not in the Disney dancing broomsticks way, but in the is that man juggling knives next to a bear kind of way. Street performers crowd the alleys, acrobats, contortionists, musicians, and actors performing snippets of bawdy plays with exaggerated gestures and jokes that mostly revolve around flatulence and lechery. You pretend to be scandalized. You are, in fact, entertained. Children chase geese. Geese chase back. Someone in a powdered wig sings off-key in Italian, and you realize you've stumbled into a spontaneous opera, or maybe just a drunk butcher with dreams. You follow the crowd to a square where a puppet show is in full swing. The marionettes are crudely carved but shockingly expressive. They bicker, they duel, they weep. One has an exaggerated nose and a sword for a leg. You laugh. Then you notice the children laughing beside you are barefoot in winter, and your mirth sobers a little. Still, the show goes on. But let's say you're craving something indoors, where the air is only moderately rancid and the threat of pickpockets is slightly reduced. You might visit a theater. Yes, a real one. Theater is booming in Paris. Molière, the king of satire, is still alive, barely. He'll soon cough himself to death mid-performance. His plays are sharp, ironic, and somehow always feature a greedy nobleman or a confused servant hiding under a table. You go to a show. Tickets? Optional, if you bribe the right person. You shuffle into the cramped space, push your way to the standing section, because you're no aristocrat, and brace yourself. The crowd is lively. They heckle. They throw fruit. Someone brings a dog. The air smells like sweat, oranges, and wax. But when the curtain rises, a literal curtain, tugged sideways by an underpaid teenager, the whole room falls into a hush. The play begins. You laugh. You cry. You duck when a bread roll flies overhead. Theater in this era is a contact sport. But it's also brilliant. The actors are sharp, the dialogue faster than you expect, the costumes opulent from afar and stitched together from who knows what up close. After the play, you follow the actors to a nearby tavern. They're still in costume, powdered wigs askew, swapping gossip and snuff. You realize that actors are the rock stars of the time, popular, scandalous, always slightly sick. But if theater isn't your thing, Paris offers other amusements. Bear baiting, for example. Yes, that's a real thing. You pass a pit where a chained bear growls at barking dogs while the crowd cheers. You recoil. You keep walking. Or maybe you stumble upon a public execution. Those double as entertainment, too. A thief is hanged while merchants sell roasted nuts nearby. Children swing from ropes mimicking the scene. You swallow hard. The line between spectacle and horror is thin here. You walk faster. Let's pivot to something gentler. You're invited to a salon, a gathering of nobles, intellectuals, and dilettantes who drink weak wine and debate big ideas while trying not to die of smallpox. It's hosted in a chilly drawing room filled with lace, oil lamps, and judgment. Someone is reading aloud from Montaigne. Someone else corrects their Latin. You try not to sneeze on the tapestry. Still, there's charm in these gatherings. You hear talk of heliocentrism, of Descartes, of the latest scandal involving a duchess and a horse, though it's never clear whose horse. Historians still argue whether salons were truly egalitarian spaces or just clever ways for bored aristocrats to flirt under the pretense of philosophy. Either way, you drink the watered wine and pretend to understand the math joke someone makes in Latin. But not all entertainment is verbal. You're taken to a masquerade ball. The masks are elaborate. Velvet, feathers, gold leaf. Behind every one is a secret, or at least someone pretending to be someone else. You dance. Poorly. But no one minds. The music is lively, played by a trio with viols and recorders. The floor is sticky. Someone spills wine on your shoe and apologizes in iambic pentameter. You laugh and let it go. Later, you sit in a corner watching powdered people pretend not to recognize each other. A man dressed as a peacock flirts with a woman dressed as despair. Someone juggles eggs. No one knows why. You clap anyway. But the most common entertainment, the one that greets you every evening, is gossip. Paris runs on rumors. Who married whom? Who cheated death? Who died because they married? Courtyard whispers carry stories faster than horses. Everyone listens. Everyone repeats. You find yourself participating. At first cautiously, then with gusto. Evenings often end with song. Not opera. Not church hymns. Just folk songs, sung softly while sitting by a hearth or leaning on a windowsill. They're about lost love, or bad landlords, or rain that won't stop. You hum along, badly. No one judges. Sometimes the streets erupt in spontaneous dancing, a fiddler starts playing, a few girls spin, a boy beats rhythm on a bucket. You join in. Your shoes weren't meant for dancing, but you manage a twirl. Someone claps. You forget, for a moment, the lice. The mold. The threat of dysentery. You remember that humans, even with no plumbing and terrible soup, will always find ways to celebrate. To laugh. To gather and sing, even if the lyrics are mostly about turnips. So you end the night with a full belly, tired legs, and a head filled with songs, gossip, and the image of a man dressed as a peacock trying to fit through a door. You fall asleep smiling. Dawn again. You're awoken by a rooster you've never seen but now irrationally loathe. The wooden shutters do little to muffle the clamor outside, vendors barking prices, horses protesting cobblestones, someone practicing the lute with far too much confidence for their skill level. And here you are, in 17th century Paris, once again wondering if today will be the day you finally manage to bathe without regretting every moment of it. Spoiler, it's not. But before we get there, you pull on your clothes, yes, the same ones as yesterday. And the day before. Laundry's more of an aspiration than a practice. Your underclothes are fragrant. Let's leave it at that. You step outside, dodging chamber pot spills, and oh look, someone's goat is eating a shoe. Yours? Possibly. You're headed toward something essential, something society values deeply, but doesn't quite understand yet. You're about to meet a Parisian doctor. Well, he calls himself a doctor. He has no formal training. His tools include a tin funnel, a set of increasingly suspicious herbs, and a book written in Latin he clearly can't read. You have a mild rash on your arm. Or maybe it's the early signs of plague. Either way, you're hoping for help. The doctor sniffs you, taps your skull 3 times, and prescribes boiled leeches with cinnamon. You blink. He insists. You eat them. They taste like betrayal. Welcome to 17th century medicine. Let's start with the basics. Most ailments are blamed on imbalanced humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Got a cough? Too much phlegm. Got acne? Clearly, an excess of yellow bile. Depressed? You guessed it, black bile's out of whack. And so the treatments begin. You're bled. Not metaphorically. They cut your arm and drain a pint or two because bad blood is clearly the issue. You're woozy, but your humors are now balanced, which is code for you're fainting, so the doctor stops. Historians still argue whether humorism persisted because people genuinely believed in it or because it gave doctors an excuse to do dramatic things with knives. But wait, maybe you're lucky. Maybe you live near a barber surgeon. That's right, the same guy who gives you a haircut will gladly amputate your toe. You enter his shop. It smells of hair, sweat, and iron. Tools hang on the wall, shears, saws, needles the size of knitting spikes. You ask if he's qualified. He winks. You're pretty sure that's not a yes. He examines your rash. He mutters something about foul spirits, then promptly offers to burn it off. You decline. Instead, he hands you a poultice made from honey, ash, and something you don't recognize. He says it will draw out the demons. You nod slowly, wondering if he means literal demons or just very determined bacteria. Because here's the thing, germs haven't been invented yet. The idea that tiny invisible organisms cause disease is still centuries away. Most folks think illness comes from bad air, miasma. Foul-smelling places are seen as breeding grounds for sickness. You're told to carry a sachet of lavender and crushed emeralds to purify the air. You do. It smells oddly comforting and wildly ineffective. You also meet a plague doctor, His outfit is legendary: wide-brimmed hat, leather gloves, long coat waxed to repel evil moisture, and that iconic beaked mask stuffed with herbs. You try not to laugh. He's the Batman of the 1600s, only with worse posture and more vinegar. The beak? It's a built-in air filter. The herbs inside are meant to fend off miasma. Unfortunately, they do nothing for the dying man he's treating on a nearby cot. He notices your rash. His eyes narrow behind his glass lenses. He mutters something Latin-sounding. You mutter something impolite-sounding. You leave. Back on the street, a woman grabs your arm and tells you that what you really need is to boil a black cat's whisker in goat milk, rub it on the rash, and then pray while standing under a walnut tree during a full moon. You do not have a cat, or a goat, or the patience. Instead, you go to an apothecary. Now this is where things get spicy, literally. Rows of tiny glass jars line the walls, filled with powders, dried plants, preserved insects, even crushed gemstones. You tell the apothecary your symptoms. He squints and pulls out a jar labeled unicorn horn. You raise a skeptical brow. He insists it's genuine. You buy it because, at this point, why not? Turns out, it's probably powdered narwhal tusk, imported by Dutch traders and sold as magical panacea. Does it work? No. But now you have glittery breath and a slightly lighter coin pouch. There's also urine diagnosis. Yes, really. Doctors, and sometimes priests, would examine a patient's pee in a clear flask, hold it up to the light, and interpret its color, consistency, and even smell. It's less science and more guesswork. Your sample? Slightly cloudy with a hint of melon. You're told you have melancholic blockage. The cure? A daily drink of boiled dandelion root and 2 slices of salted eel. You regret everything. But not all medical practices are doom and gloom. There's a midwife in your building, tough as nails, wise beyond measure, and the only person you actually trust. She's delivered 20 babies, treated 15 fevers, and once punched a man for suggesting she couldn't read. She makes you a poultice of calendula and wax. It helps. A bit. She also tells you to avoid sugar and wine for a few days. You nod solemnly, then eat a sugar cake and drink 3 cups of spiced claret. You are, after all, only human. As you lie in bed that night, rash still itching, belly slightly upset, and dreams haunted by leeches, you reflect on what you've learned. Medicine in 17th century Paris is a lottery. You might get a healer who uses clean tools and rational herbs. Or a charlatan who insists you bury a turnip under your pillow to ward off infection. Historians still argue whether this chaotic blend of ancient tradition, folk magic, and trial and error did more harm than good. But what's clear is this: people tried. They genuinely wanted to help, even if their methods involved a little too much goat bile and not nearly enough hygiene. So you close your eyes, lavender sachet tucked under your chin, praying to avoid both fevered dreams and actual fever. Tomorrow, you tell yourself, you'll finally feel better. You won't. But at least you didn't let anyone cauterize you today. The sun has barely risen, but the city is already humming, though not in a good way. The hum is more of a collective groan made up of shouting hawkers, barking dogs, rattling wagons, and a choir of pigeons plotting petty crimes. You rise, scratch at your barely improved rash, and realize, once again, that everything smells faintly of soup and despair. It's bath day. Or, well, it's supposed to be. You've been psyching yourself up for it all week. You've asked locals where one even finds a proper place to bathe in Paris. You expected answers like the town bathhouse or the public fountain. Instead, you got nervous glances and a suggestion to just dab yourself with vinegar and hope for the best. Still, you're determined. A proper soak. Just once. You head toward one of the few remaining public bathhouses, those medieval relics somehow limping along in the 1600s despite popular opinion turning on the very concept of communal bathing. Once, these places were full of life, steamy rooms with tiled benches, hot stones, perfumed water, the occasional lute player providing ambience. Now? They're practically abandoned, rumored to be dens of sin or, worse, sources of disease. See, by the mid-17th century, Parisians were growing suspicious of water. Yes, water. Historians still argue whether this paranoia was the result of genuine medical theory or just a convenient excuse to avoid regular hygiene. But the belief had set in, soaking your body, especially with warm water, opened the skin's pores, and through those pores, illness could sneak in like a thief in the night. And so, people stopped bathing. You're told that dry cleaning is the way to go, rubbing your body with cloth soaked in vinegar or rose water. Or just applying more perfume. Perfume is Paris's real soap now. But you, bold time traveling soul that you are, march into the bathhouse like a legend. Inside, it's damp, echoey, and deeply unsettling. There are 3 other patrons, 2 silently wrapped in towels that haven't been washed since Henry IV, and 1 man who appears to be arguing with a ghost. The ghost is winning. You approach the bathing steward, a man who wears a robe too confidently for someone managing tepid puddles. He offers you a wooden tub. You nod. He leads you past the warming stones, which are really just burnt bricks, and into a chamber with flickering candlelight and a distinct smell of moss, sweat, and hope. You undress. It's a vulnerable experience. The tub is barely deep enough to cover your thighs, the water is more lukewarm than warm, and you try not to think about how many people have used this tub before you. The steward gives you a bar of something that might once have been soap or cheese. You rub it on your skin. It leaves a film. You're not sure if you're getting cleaner or simply marinated. Then, a woman bursts into the chamber. She's holding a bundle of herbs and shouts that the room needs to be re-steamed. She tosses the herbs into a pot, which gives off smoke thick enough to confuse your lungs. You cough. She nods approvingly. The herbs include thyme, bay leaves, and something suspiciously like onion. Apparently, this is meant to restore your inner air. Your tub water now smells like a roast chicken. Meanwhile, in elite homes across Paris, nobles are engaging in their own version of cleanliness, powder baths. No water. Just finely milled powder, often made from starch, ground flours, or even crushed eggshells. The powder is patted onto the skin, then brushed off with soft cloths. No rinse. No rub. Just dusting. You're jealous. Sort of. And while we're at it, let's talk about bathing superstitions. One old belief claims that washing your feet too often weakens your eyesight. Another warns against washing your head on certain moon phases, lest you invite madness. You begin to understand why everyone here smells like onions and anxiety. You brave another minute in your stew tub before emerging like a soggy biscuit. The steward offers a coarse towel that exfoliates more than dries. You feel strangely raw, like you've shed a layer of dignity. Later, wandering through the Marais district, you see a woman using a silver ear spoon in public. It's a small tool for ear hygiene, oddly common in this era. She notices your stare, scoffs, and says something about keeping the hearing winds clear. You nod, as if you, too, are deeply familiar with hearing winds. You pass a group of well-dressed men wearing lace collars and clouds of cologne. Their wigs are powdered, their boots polished, and their personal scents formidable. One of them spritzes perfume directly onto a handkerchief and uses it as a mobile air filter. You wonder if he's ahead of his time or just fed up. Because in 17th century Paris, smell equals status. The rich cover themselves in musk, ambergris, a fancy name for whale vomit, and floral waters. The poor mask their odors with stronger odors. And the bathhouse, that noble relic of cleanliness, becomes more myth than norm. There are private tubs in some homes, usually made of copper, wood, or even lead. But heating water is labor-intensive. You have to carry it, boil it, pour it, pray it doesn't cool too quickly. Most people decide it's simply not worth the effort. It's easier to change your chemise and call it a day. And so, after your brave bathhouse experience, you return home damp, confused, and a bit proud. You survived a 17th century bath. Sort of. You don't feel cleaner, but you do feel changed. Maybe it's the herbs. Maybe it's the emotional scarring. Either way, you're done. Next time, you decide, you'll go full Parisian, vinegar dab, lace collar, 3 spritzes of ambergris, and absolutely no questions asked. You've barely dried off from your lukewarm plunge into Parisian bathhouse culture when a new problem begins to surface: your skin. It itches. Not the firewall too long kind of itch. This is the deep, lingering kind, that something might be living on me variety. Because while bathing is mostly ceremonial here in 17th century Paris, lice are not. Lice are household names. Intimate companions. You've probably already been introduced, even if you didn't notice. And while you were valiantly scrubbing your limbs in cloudy herb water last section, dozens of new tenants were likely setting up shop in your clothes, your bed, and, brace yourself, your powdered wig, if you're fashionable enough to wear one. In Parisian homes, lice are such a given that most people don't even consider them a mark of poverty. Nobles have them. Merchants have them. That well-perfumed man you passed earlier with the scented handkerchief? He has at least 4 varieties on him at all times. Some French doctors of the time even argued lice were beneficial, helping to drain bad blood or distract from worse diseases. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief or just a profoundly lazy excuse. Either way, you are officially in the lice age. And it's not just lice. There's also fleas, bedbugs, mites. A true ecosystem. Your mattress, stuffed with straw and soft regrets, is likely home to entire generations of them. You lie down, and they rise up like feudal lords demanding tribute in the form of your flesh. This is why Parisians of the time develop what might generously be called a tolerance. They pick lice off themselves casually during dinner. They carry flea traps, little boxes lined with honey or cloth, worn under clothes to attract the insects away from vital areas. You consider making one yourself. Then you remember your fingers still smell faintly of thyme and mildew. Instead, you wander through your neighborhood seeking relief. You overhear a street seller hawking bed fumigators, small clay pots designed to burn herbs beneath your mattress, supposedly driving the bugs away with thick, herbal smoke. One woman warns that these fumigators often set beds on fire. Another shrugs and says, yes, but then there are fewer bugs. A trade-off. Like everything else here. You also pass an apothecary with a small sign listing pest remedies. You take note. Quicksilver and vinegar salve sounds lethal, probably is. Crushed rose petals and soot smells poetic, does nothing. Boil your undergarments in salt water, then pray, practical, spiritual, despairing. You begin to understand why Parisians perfume everything. Not just themselves, but their gloves, their letters, their curtains, even their pets. It's not just vanity. It's a full-blown olfactory defense system. You decide to experiment with a classic cure, powdered lavender sachets placed in your shirt. It masks the scent of flea bites, and you tell yourself you're now a walking garden. Until it starts making you sneeze. Meanwhile, you watch your landlord's daughter rake a bone comb through her curls. She pauses occasionally to inspect what she finds, crush it between her fingernails, and continue. She catches you looking. You must do this twice a week, she says, seriously. Or they will think you are weak. You nod solemnly, resisting the urge to scratch your scalp like a feral dog. Let's talk about clothing hygiene, shall we? Washing your actual body may be discouraged, but laundering linen underclothes is seen as essential. People believe that dirt and oil could transfer from your body to your clothes, so by frequently changing shirts and chemises, you somehow remained cleanish. Problem is, laundry is a nightmare. Boiling water. Heavy tubs. Lye soap that burns your hands. If you live near the Seine, you might dunk your linens into the river, then beat them against stones. Sometimes laundry is sun-dried on the same lines where people hang herbs, meat, or underfed cats. And even when your clothes are clean, your outer garments, wool coats, brocade dresses, embroidered vests, are never washed. Too delicate. Too expensive. Instead, they're brushed, sprayed with perfume, and occasionally buried in cedar shavings. You now suspect your jacket has lived a fuller life than you. Back at your lodgings, your neighbor is boiling water on the stove. You ask her if it's for tea. She laughs. It's for lice, she says. We boil the combs, not the leaves. You watch as she carefully dips a carved bone comb into the bubbling pot, then places it on a towel like sacred equipment. She notices your confusion and kindly offers you her second comb. Start at the nape of the neck, she instructs. That's where they feel safest. You thank her. And begin. One pass. Then another. You find 3. You name them Jean, Jacques, and Regret. Later that evening, you hear scratching from under your bed. You hope it's the cat. It is not. It's your mattress. The straw inside has become something of a pest hotel. You remember a fact you read earlier in a pamphlet: some households in Paris light fires beneath their bed frames to drive out vermin. Others simply beat the mattress with sticks until something runs out. You try both. You don't sleep well. So, why doesn't anyone do anything? Why live like this? The answer lies partly in culture, partly in medicine, and mostly in resignation. This is just life. Normal. You scratch, you powder, you carry scented herbs in your hat, and you pretend not to notice when someone else's collar starts twitching. But as you scratch your wrists for the 10th time that night, you make a promise to your modern self: never again will you take a hot shower or a clean mattress for granted. Especially not one without fleas. The days pass, and as you settle into the scratchy, insect-diplomatic rhythm of 17th century Parisian life, you begin to notice something strange. It's not the lice. You've made your peace with Jean and Jacques. Regret, however, remains a menace. No, what stands out now is the air itself. Not the smell, though let's be honest, you've learned to breathe shallowly. It's the smog, the haze, the faint tang of burning wood, dung, and what is that? Sulfur? Is someone tanning leather again? Because in this section of the city, and especially around your cramped little quarter, Paris smells like work. The industrial kind. You're not just living among poets and plague survivors. You're surrounded by tradespeople, and many of them deal in very specific kinds of stench. Like the tanners, who soak hides in lime, water, and dog urine before scraping them smooth. Or the soap boilers, who render animal fat with ash and seawater. Or the dyers, who require things like crushed insects, fermented urine, or iron shavings to tint silk and linen vibrant colors. Yes, you're living in a watercolor painting that's been dipped in a chamber pot. Your neighbor, who mends leather gloves for a living, explains cheerfully that his brother used to be a night soilman, a profession involving the collection of human waste from latrines, usually in the dead of night, which was then sold to tanners or dumped far outside the city. Unless it wasn't. You politely nod, suppressing your gag reflex, and ask where that waste might end up otherwise. He waves vaguely toward the river. Sometimes it flows back, he says, shrugging. That's why we drink wine. And suddenly, it all clicks. Because Paris in this age may be bathed in filth, but it is also awash in wine. Weak wine. Sour wine. Spiced wine. Wine made drinkable only because it's safer than the water. Even the nuns drink it, the glove mender tells you. For the Lord and for the germs. Which brings us to a strange irony: everyone here is filthy, and yet obsessed with cleanliness, in their own way. Take your landlady, for example. She hasn't bathed in 6 weeks, but she sweeps the threshold of her home every morning with lavender-scented straw. Her dishes sparkle, she washes them with sand and boiling water. But her 2-year-old child eats food directly off the cobbled floor like a content piglet. It's not that people are lazy about hygiene. They just prioritize differently. And nowhere is this clearer than in their obsession with smells. You've already noticed the sachets of herbs tucked into sleeves and bodices, the perfumed gloves worn by nobles, the cinnamon-sprinkled handkerchiefs pressed discreetly to nostrils during walks. But there's something deeper here, a belief that smells are health. According to 17th century miasma theory, disease comes not from germs, a concept centuries away, but from bad air. Foul stenches. Corrupted vapors. This means that if you breathe something pleasant, you're safe. But if you inhale the sour stink of the tanner's yard? Well, may the saints preserve you. You even spot a man wearing a peculiar plague doctor-style beak mask one afternoon, not because of an epidemic, but simply as fashion among the hyper-cautious. His beak is filled with rosemary and mint. You ask him if it works. He replies, "I haven't died yet." Fair point. At the local market, you find more proof of this olfactory obsession. The vendors selling herbs and flowers do brisker business than the ones hawking bread. Dried bundles of thyme and wormwood are said to purify the air. Fresh basil is kept in windowsills to make the devil sneeze. And little braided ropes of garlic hang everywhere, like medieval air fresheners. One merchant offers you a small jar of ambergris, a waxy, sweet-smelling substance produced in the intestines of whales and considered a luxury scent. It's ludicrously expensive and smells like oceanic vanilla. You ask what it's for. "Rub it on your neck," she says, "and the lice won't like you anymore." You resist the urge to purchase it out of desperation. Instead, you decide to follow a few locals into the more elegant side of Paris, the salons, the manicured gardens, the stately homes with high gates and slightly less vermin. You've heard that the wealthy enjoy a more refined form of cleanliness, and you're curious what that entails. At one estate, you're welcomed into a drawing room that smells of orange peel and sandalwood. The hostess wears a powdered wig so tall it brushes the canopy above her chair. She explains that she bathes once a month, whether she needs it or not, and uses honey water and rose oil instead of soap. You ask about her skincare routine. She smiles and lifts a fan. "We exfoliate with breadcrumbs." You laugh. She does not. It's true, wealthy Parisians in this period sometimes rub old bread crusts on their faces to remove dead skin. They also brush their teeth with crushed eggshells, rinse their mouths with vinegar and myrrh, and consider leeches an acceptable way to improve complexion. Historians still argue whether these elite hygiene practices were more effective or just more expensive. Either way, you can't help but notice they still scratch behind their ears like everyone else. That night, you try one final trick, an herbal steam bath offered by a traveling Hungarian healer in a back alley near the Marais. You're led into a tent filled with boiling pots of chamomile and mint, seated on a wooden stool, and told to inhale deeply while sweating out your urban humors. It smells lovely. It feels calming. You briefly think you're finally winning the war against grime. Then the healer lifts your arm and sniffs. 3 more sessions, he declares, grimly. You walk home that night under a light drizzle. The cobblestones are slick with something unidentifiable, probably a mixture of wine, soot, and horse. You step carefully. As you pass a group of children playing near a barrel fire, one of them looks up at you and says, "You smell like herbs and fear." You nod. That sounds about right. Back in your room, you lie down, not exactly clean but at least cleansed, in spirit. You light a bundle of thyme, watch it smoke gently in the dark, and whisper your thanks to every modern showerhead in existence. Tomorrow, you'll try to find soap that doesn't sting. But for now, you rest. You wake up the next morning already dreading the day's inevitable descent into dampness. There's something particularly cruel about starting your day dirty and somehow managing to get worse. But today, you're determined to crack the mystery of soap, or rather, why no one in 17th century Paris seems to use it the way you expect. So, you go searching. Your first stop is a modest apothecary wedged between a wigmaker's shop and a bakery that smells faintly of burning feathers. The apothecary greets you with a weary smile and motions toward his shelves of bottles, bundles, and mystery powders. You ask about soap. He raises an eyebrow. Olive oil or tallow, he asks, as if you've just requested tea in the middle of a blacksmith's forge. You have no idea what the correct answer is, so you mutter both, and he nods sagely. He produces a round, brownish bar the color of regret and hands it to you. It smells, not bad. Just, historical. This one's Marseille style, he says. Good for hands. Bad for everything else. You thank him, slip it into your satchel, and wonder what the rest of Paris does if this is the good stuff. You find out soon enough. Because as you move through the neighborhoods, up toward the bustling Rue Saint-Honoré and back down past Les Halles, you begin to understand, most people don't use soap at all. Not because they lack access. Not even because they dislike it. They simply don't trust it. You overhear one woman telling her neighbor that soap draws out the illness if used too often. A washerwoman near the river explains that it dries the skin and makes your humors fight. Even a local priest, who you'd hope might endorse basic hygiene, warns his flock that too much cleanliness invites vanity. Of course, the washerwoman uses soap. But only for clothes. That's the paradox. In 17th century Paris, laundry is a full-time affair, yet washing the body is an afterthought. You follow a team of washerwomen to the Seine, where they scrub garments against planks and stones with aggressive purpose. Their knuckles are red and raw. Their voices are sharp as they gossip over suds and splash. One of them is singing something about a priest, a widow, and a goose, and you decide not to ask. But you notice something else: they don't wear gloves. Soap, for them, is a working material. A tool. One woman even uses her teeth to open a bundle of lye, then spits casually into the river. You ask what kind of soap they use. Goat fat and ashes, one replies, matter of fact. Sometimes boiled nettles, if we're feeling fancy. And that's the thing, soap, in this city, is as much craft as commodity. Some is made with olive oil and salt, perfumed with herbs. Other types are rendered from beef tallow and ash, dark as tar, coarse as sand. A few daring vendors sell imported Castile soap from Spain, white, smooth, and considered scandalously luxurious. But even the best bars are rarely used on human skin. Too drying. Too harsh. Too strange. One merchant tells you proudly that he's created a new gentlewoman soap with goat milk and lavender. He's only sold 3 bars in 6 months. They think it's witchcraft, he confides. You begin to realize how central belief is to bathing practices in this era. The average Parisian doesn't just weigh convenience or cost, they consider the philosophy of soap. Cleanliness is spiritual, political, even personal. For instance, the nobility often skip soap entirely and instead rub themselves with linen cloths dipped in vinegar. Or rose water. Or milk. Queen Anne uses wine, your landlady mentions over dinner, as if this is common knowledge. But only red. You ask whether that actually gets her clean. The landlady shrugs. She smells like a holy day. That's all that matters. Indeed, smell trumps sanitation. The perfume industry in Paris is booming. You walk past entire stalls dedicated to vials of amber, violet, and clove. One street performer sprays scented water into the air and lets it rain down on passers-by like divine mist. And once again, it hits you, soap is rarely about cleanliness. It's about social class. Soap, if used at all, is for your hands and your linens. Not your body. Bodies, in polite society, are masked with perfume and covered with lace, not scrubbed until pink. Historians still argue whether this aversion to soap stemmed from medical superstition, lack of access, or sheer custom. But what's clear is that soap was seen as both cure and curse, depending on the circle. Eventually, you're invited to a perfumer's workshop near the Isle de la site. The air inside is thick with bergamot and sandalwood. That's bubble. Herbs hang drying from the rafters. The master perfumer offers you a sniff of his latest creation, a musk and violet blend designed to charm the bishops and hide the butcher. You ask him if he uses soap. He laughs. Soap is for the poor. I smell like myth. That night, you try your newly acquired bar of Marseille soap. You scrub your arms in a wooden basin using water heated over a fire and cooled by impatience. It hurts. Your skin is pink. The soap leaves a waxy residue. You smell vaguely of olives and despair. But for the first time in days, you feel, not clean, exactly. Just less filthy. And that's enough. You sit by the window, watching the flicker of street lamps reflected in the river. Somewhere below, someone is arguing about cheese. A dog is barking at nothing. You breathe in the crisp night air, tinged faintly with thyme and horse sweat, and let your hands rest on the sill. One smells like ash. The other, faintly like lemon. Progress. You wake to rain. Not the pleasant kind that makes you feel cozy and introspective. No, this is Paris rain, which means a relentless drizzle that's somehow both thin and heavy. The cobblestones glisten with slippery film, and the gutters overflow with a substance that can only be described as vaguely threatening. You decide to stay indoors. But indoors in 17th century Paris isn't quite the sanctuary you might hope. The walls of your rented room are made of stone and wood, insulating only in theory. The fireplace smokes more than it heats. And the air is perpetually damp, like someone has been gently exhaling on everything for hours. Still, you wrap yourself in the scratchy wool blanket your landlady claims is practically new, and try to pass the time. But soon, you're distracted by a new and unwelcome sensation, itching. At first, it's just your neck. Then your wrist. Then, mysteriously, your elbow. You scratch absent-mindedly, until it dawns on you. Oh no. You have lice. Maybe fleas. Possibly both. There's no way to know for sure without a microscope and the will to see something deeply upsetting. Your first instinct is to wash everything you own. Your second instinct is to burn it. Unfortunately, neither option is practical. Instead, you head out, hooded against the rain, in search of delousing solutions. You begin at a barbershop. Not because you need a trim, but because in 17th century Paris, barbers are unofficial doctors, and they're known to deal with infestations. You're seated next to a man having a molar yanked out with what looks like a set of fireplace tongs. Comforting. The barber inspects your scalp, nods solemnly, and prescribes mercury ointment. You hesitate. Or you can try vinegar and garlic, he offers. You opt for the latter. Back in your room, you lather your head with vinegar and crushed garlic cloves. The smell is inspiring. You're now a salad with legs. But the itching subsides slightly. For your clothes, you try boiling them in the communal cauldron downstairs, which earns you several looks and one comment about wasting heat. Still, it's better than sleeping in infested breeches. You lay your damp garments near the hearth and consider the greater picture. Because here's the truth, everyone in 17th century Paris has lice. It's expected. It's normalized. In fact, some people even keep special lice combs on chains around their necks for convenient midday grooming. One noblewoman, whom you briefly meet at a baker's stall, casually pulls a flea from her bodice and flicks it into the street. She doesn't even blink. And speaking of fleas, let's talk about beds. Your mattress is stuffed with straw. Not clean straw, just straw. And over time, it becomes a bustling metropolis for tiny, six-legged residents. Bedbugs thrive here. Fleas flourish. Mites? Don't ask. You attempt to smoke them out by burning herbs beneath your bed, lavender, wormwood, rosemary. It helps, a little. But mostly it just gives your room the ambience of a slightly haunted greenhouse. At this point, you wonder, what do Parisians of the time do to stay clean? Or rather, clean enough? Turns out, they rely on three things. Changing linen frequently. Using scented waters. Praying for the best. Linen shifts, those long undergarments worn close to the skin, are considered skin cleaners. People believe that linen draws out sweat and filth, and as long as you change it often, you've effectively bathed. Some even wear multiple layers of linen, rotating them daily and airing them out by the window. Soap? Optional. Water? Rarely. But linen? Essential. Then there's scented vinegar, stored in little vessels called pomanders. Rich folks carry them around on chains or in decorative cases. The smell, usually clove, rosemary, or rose, masks not only personal odor but also the city's pungent atmosphere. And for the final line of defense? Faith. many believe that cleanliness of the soul is more important than the body. You overhear a priest advising a merchant's daughter not to wash during Lent, as it might tempt vanity. She nods solemnly, while absently scratching her knee through 3 layers of skirt. Historians still argue whether 17th century hygiene was driven more by fear of illness or fear of impropriety. Some records suggest Parisians thought water opened the body's pores of vulnerability. Others say it was all just a lack of plumbing and warm towels. You, meanwhile, are developing a system. Vinegar for the scalp. Herbal infusions for your linens. Daily airings of your one good shirt. And garlic. Always garlic. You become so accustomed to the scent that when a stranger on the street sniffs the air and mutters, "Ah, roast fowl," you don't correct him. One afternoon, while airing your blanket in the alley, you meet a laundress who claims to have discovered a secret lice cure, crushed chestnuts and goose fat. You politely decline, but admire her confidence. Later, you spot a nobleman having his wig powdered on a balcony. The powder is pink. Possibly cinnamon. Possibly arsenic. You don't ask. Instead, you sit by the river, watching the rain finally slow to a drizzle, your scalp tingling with the faint scent of vinegar and victory. Clean? Not exactly. But in the grand scheme of 17th century Paris, you're practically radiant. The sun peeks through the slate-grey clouds for the first time in days, and with it comes a strange, giddy optimism. Maybe it's the mild lice relief. Maybe it's the sleep you finally got last night, not being woken by your own scratching. Or maybe it's just the light, the kind that makes even soggy Paris look like something out of a painting. So, naturally, you decide it's time to go shopping. You're in the market for new clothes, something that hasn't spent the last 3 years being colonized by insects. But first, you'll need money. And money in 17th century Paris is, shall we say, complicated. You've probably been carrying a pouch of clinking coins, levers, sols, deniers. The exchange rates alone could drive a person to drink. 12 deniers make a sol. 20 sols make a lever. But inflation, regional mints, and counterfeit coins mean that no one is ever quite sure what anything costs. Not even the shopkeepers. Still, you count your grubby change and make your way toward the markets along Rue Saint-Denis, the lifeline of the city's commerce. It's bustling, as always. Peddlers shout over one another, chickens dart under carts, and the smell is an aggressive swirl of fresh bread, fish guts, and hot wax. You wander into a cloth shop. Bolts of fabric line the walls, wool, linen, damask, and even some rare silks, locked behind a wooden grate like high-security prisoners. The merchant eyes you with a mix of skepticism and boredom. You pretend to be examining thread count, though you're really just stalling to figure out how much you can afford. Probably not much. In the 1600s, clothing isn't just a personal expression, it's a legal category. France has sumptuary laws that restrict what you can wear based on your class. Silk, certain colors, fur trim, these are for nobles only. You? You're likely a middling commoner, so your options are more plain sack with buttons than embroidered peacock fantasy. You finally settle on a brown wool tunic that itches just to look at, but it's new, or new enough, and mercifully lice-free. You trade nearly all your coins for it. It's an investment in your future, or at least your torso. Next up, food. Because if you're going to parade around in cleanish clothing, you might as well do so with a full stomach. You join the line at a bakery for a loaf of coarse rye bread. It's dense, slightly sour, and guaranteed to break a tooth if you're careless. But it's a staple, along with bean stew, salted herring, and hard cheese. The diet of the 17th century Parisian is heavy on carbs and light on vitamins. There's a fishmonger next door, but you hesitate. The fish has been sitting out since dawn, and it smells like it knows things. Dark things. Secrets of the Seine. You move on. As you munch your way through the bread, you pass by a woman selling candied almonds, which look lovely but cost roughly a week's rent. Beside her, a man in a filthy apron hawks meat pies that he swears are mostly beef. You don't ask mostly what else. In this era, food adulteration is a sport. Flour is bulked with chalk. Wine is sweetened with lead. Milk is watered down to the consistency of regret. People die from food often, and no one seems too surprised. Historians still argue whether most deaths were from the additives or the storage, or perhaps a lethal cocktail of both. Either way, you decide to cook for yourself tonight. Safer that way. At a stall near the river, you buy onions, dried beans, and a pinch of rosemary. Not luxurious, but filling. Back in your room, you attempt to prepare a stew using your tiny hearth and a dented pot. The beans take forever to soften. You consider that this might be the origin of both patience and indigestion. As the pot simmers, you think about the luxury of modern kitchens. Timers, stoves, even cutting boards. Here, you have a dull knife, a hunk of wood, and the ever-present risk of slicing a finger and dying of tetanus. Still, there's something comforting in the ritual. The heat of the fire. The aroma of onion and herbs. The knowledge that you probably won't die from this meal, probably. Dinner ends with a hunk of goat cheese and a few dried prunes. Not exactly Michelin star, but edible. You even feel content. Which is when the neighbors start fighting. You can hear every word through the thin walls, accusations about unpaid debts, burnt bread, and an incident involving a missing chicken. You try to tune it out, but it's like an angry podcast in a language you almost understand. Eventually, you wrap yourself in your itchy new tunic and lie down. And that's when you see it, a rat, staring at you from the corner. You blink. It blinks back. In 17th century Paris, rats are practically roommates. The plague? Yeah, that was last century. But the rats stuck around. They scuttle in the streets, the sewers, and yes, your floorboards. This one is bold. He eyes your bread crust, darts forward, and vanishes with it into the wall. You consider screaming. But instead, you laugh. Because at this point, it's just another part of the day. You've traded your old lice-ridden shirt for a new one, navigated coin confusion, purchased nearly legit onions, avoided a chalk flour loaf, and cooked a stew in a glorified fireplace. You've survived another day in 17th century Paris. And despite everything, the rain, the rats, the vinegar scalp, you kind of love it. It's disgusting. It's difficult. It's dramatic. But it's never, ever dull. It's well past midnight now, and Paris has settled into its uneasy sleep. The shouting has dwindled to a few muffled arguments, the distant tolling of a church bell, and the occasional clatter of a chamber pot being emptied from a window. Yes, people really do that here. Gravity, it seems, is the city's waste management system. You lie on your straw-stuffed mattress, wrapped in a scratchy blanket, staring at the ceiling. You try not to think about rats. Or fleas. Or that creeping tickle on your ankle that you hope, really hope, is just the blanket brushing your skin. Tomorrow is a holy day. Which, in Paris, means most businesses are closed, the bells will be louder, and there will be a procession or two wandering past your street, chanting in Latin and tossing incense like it's confetti. But you have other plans, you're going to get clean. Now, when we say a cleano in 17th century Paris, we're speaking in deeply relative terms. Remember, water is considered suspicious. Still water breeds miasma. Running water is scarce. Bathing is something doctors often discourage, warning it opens the pores of the soul to disease. Hygiene, for the average person, is more about odor management than microbial warfare. But you're determined. You begin your morning by heating a small pot of water over your hearth. There's no indoor plumbing, just a chipped ceramic basin, some soap made from animal fat and ash, and a damp rag with dreams of glory. You splash water on your face, which feels heroic. Then, gingerly, you wash your neck, armpits, and hands. These are the visible zones, the parts you are socially obligated to keep presentable. Anything more extensive is saved for special occasions, like weddings or executions. Historians still debate whether 17th century Parisians smelled that much worse than their neighbors across Europe. Some argue the city's proximity to water, hello, Seine, offered more opportunities to rinse off. Others point to the robust perfume trade and say, if nothing else, they smelled interestingly. You, however, smell like a wet barn. So you decide to go big. You're heading to a public bathhouse. Now, public baths are a holdover from Roman times, but by your century, they've taken on a much shadier reputation. Once centers of hygiene and health, they're now associated with gossip, scandal, and, how to say this delicately, certain evening services. Nevertheless, the bathhouse in Rue de la Huchette is still in operation, and you heard someone say they offer herbal steams on weekends. You wrap yourself in your cloak and make your way across the cobblestones, stepping carefully around horse dung, fish guts, and the ever-present human mystery puddles. When you arrive, the bathhouse looks respectable. Stone facade, carved wooden sign with a faded depiction of St. Louis in a tub, and two bored-looking attendants at the door. Inside, the air is thick with heat, mildew, and lavender, probably covering something worse. You pay your entry fee, leave your cloak and shoes in a locker, which is just a box with a latch, and step into the bathing room. Here's what greets you: a stone basin filled with tepid, cloudy water, a few naked bodies floating like dumplings, and one particularly elderly man singing what might be a hymn or a warning. You hesitate. Very reasonably. But you came here to bathe, and bathe you shall. You slip into the water. It's not hot. It's not even warm. It's ambiguous. But the sensation is oddly soothing, and after a few minutes, you start to feel like your skin might remember what clean once meant. You scrub yourself with a lye soap bar that could double as sandpaper, making small talk with the woman beside you, who's missing 3 teeth and seems to know everyone's business. She's delighted by your presence. Says you don't look like a bathhouse regular. You take that as a compliment. There are buckets of water at the side for rinsing, one cold, one even colder. You grit your teeth and pour it over your head. It's invigorating. Which is a polite way of saying it feels like your brain just got slapped by a glacier. Still, it's worth it. For the first time in days, your scalp doesn't itch. Your fingernails look like they belong to a living human. And the smell? Well, now you smell like a combination of ash soap, mildew, and victory. After drying off with what can only be described as a communal towel, you try not to think about it, you dress and step back into the Paris morning air. You feel reborn. Briefly. Because almost immediately, a carriage splashes you with street muck, a drunk man bumps into you and sneezes into your ear, and the smell of open drains reminds you, this city is a war zone for the senses. Still, you're clean. You did it. You decide to celebrate by attending Mass at Église Saint Eustache. Not because you're particularly devout, but because it's one of the few places where you can sit quietly, enjoy the incense, and listen to music that isn't someone arguing about soup. Inside, the vaulted ceilings seem to swallow your worries whole. The organ echoes through the stone like thunder made of honey. You sit in the back pew, half listening, half daydreaming. Someone sneezes into a handkerchief. You flinch. It's fine. You're stronger now. On your way out, you buy a tiny wax candle shaped like a lamb, said to bring health and good luck. You don't believe in charms, but maybe today, you'll make an exception. Back home, you hang your cloak to dry, reheat last night's stew, and watch the light change on your wall as the sun sets over Paris. And though you know your cleanliness won't last, that tomorrow you'll be back to scratching and squinting and sidestepping puddles of doom, you feel something close to peace. You bathed in 17th century Paris. And you live to tell the tale. The candle you bought earlier, shaped like a lamb and supposedly lucky, has burned itself into a soft pool of wax. Its little wick sputters out just as the Paris sky turns that familiar smoky orange-grey, like someone's roasting fog over an open fire. You stare at it, wondering if any part of your day could actually be considered lucky. You did manage to bathe, yes, but that came with minor trauma, at least one questionable rash, and a stranger's foot in your armpit. Luck, it seems, is a nuanced thing. Still, with the clinging scent of lavender mildew and civic achievement in your hair, you decide to treat yourself to an evening stroll. Twilight in 17th century Paris is not quite romantic, it's closer to vaguely threatening but moderately scenic. The shadows are long, the buildings lean just enough to whisper, and the street lamps have only just begun to glow, faintly, like they're not convinced this whole light thing is worth it. You pass by a boulangerie and catch the last warm breath of bread being pulled from the oven. Your stomach growls in appreciation. You hadn't planned on buying anything, but your feet steer you inside like you're possessed by a carb-seeking spirit. The baker is a man with forearms like rolling pins and a smile that looks permanent. He offers you a small loaf, a day old, he admits, but it's still good. You trade a worn copper coin for it and take your treasure outside. You tear it open and, well, you try not to get emotional, but this bread is religion. It's dense, earthy, a little sour. Bits of flour dust your cloak. As you chew, you imagine you could walk the entire length of the Seine sustained by this single loaf and the faint thrill of having clean armpits. You continue your stroll, passing windows aglow with flickering candlelight. Here's a family hunched over soup, here's a man trying to tune a lute, here's a group of children playing a clapping game that might be a curse disguised as rhyme. Every corner holds a little story. You duck into an alley shortcut and find yourself, quite unintentionally, in the tanner's district. You know this immediately, because your nostrils try to stage a revolt. Tanning hides in the 17th century is a foul-smelling business. It involves soaking animal skins in vats of urine, dung, and fermented brain matter, each contributing to that rich bouquet that now assaults your sinuses like a slap from God. The alley is lined with wooden racks of drying leather, heaps of scraped-off fur, and the occasional stray dog licking something best left unexamined. You pull your cloak over your nose and hustle through. There's a scholarly debate, believe it or not, about how much the average Parisian knows acclimated to these smells. Some historians argue they simply tuned it out. Others suggest smell was a vital class indicator. The worse your environment smelled, the lower your status. You were what you breathed. You make it out with only minor olfactory damage and decide to detour toward the Pont Neuf, one of the few bridges in Paris not covered in ramshackle houses. It offers a clear view of the water, moonlight on stone, and, if you squint, the quiet suggestion that life might be lovely here, under all the grime. On the bridge, vendors are packing up their wares. A woman selling roasted chestnuts offers you a sample. They're burnt on the outside, mushy on the inside, and you love them. A man with a trained monkey on a leash nods at you. The monkey nods too. You nod back. It's very civil. You lean on the stone rail, chewing chestnuts, and gaze down at the Seine. The water is dark and slow, carrying scraps of wood, leaves, and nope, don't look too closely. The river has its secrets. Behind you, the city pulses softly. Faint music from a tavern. Someone shouting about bread. The clatter of hooves as a carriage lumbers past, wheels sticky with the remains of the day. You head home by lantern light, carefully avoiding patches of shadow where rats, or worse, philosophers, might be hiding. Back in your little room, you light the stub of your wax lamp again. Its melted shape now looks like a sleeping seal, and somehow that's comforting. You sit down to remove your boots and notice something distressing, a tiny blister on your heel rubbed raw from walking. You wince. Then you smile. Because this, too, is Paris. The blisters, the bread, the bathhouses, the sneezing strangers and steaming hides. The awful and the beautiful mashed together like two strangers sharing a basin, both pretending not to notice the foot situation. You rinse your feet in a bowl of now cold water and dry them with a patch of linen that smells faintly of rosemary and soap. Then, finally, you climb into your makeshift bed. You stretch. You yawn. And for a brief, golden second, you forget the fleas. You wake the next morning not to birdsong or sunlight, but to shouting. Loud, insistent, utterly unbothered by the hour shouting. It seems someone's stolen a wheel of cheese, and not just any cheese, but a particularly pungent one from the merchant who sells next to the fountain in Place Maubert. He's swearing vengeance with the kind of fury normally reserved for land disputes and witch trials. You lie there for a moment, blinking at the ceiling, letting the voices rise and fall like a chaotic lullaby in reverse. Eventually, you sit up and stretch, your joints creaking in protest. You're sore in places you didn't know you had places. It's a bathhouse hangover. The 17th century equivalent of a spa coma. Your skin feels a little tighter, your scalp a bit less itchy, and your muscles vaguely resentful. You shuffle over to your window and peek outside. Paris is already awake. Smoke from a dozen chimneys curls into the air. Vendors are setting up carts. Someone is sweeping something wet and ambiguous from their doorstep. The cheese thief, it seems, has escaped. Probably to sell his prize in a different arrondissement. You wish him luck. You pull on your clothes, trying not to think about how long it's been since they were washed. You splash your face with the last of your water and chew a piece of stale bread that now tastes like yesterday's hope. Today, you're going to the market. Now, markets in 17th century Paris are not the charming food halls you might picture. They're teeming, noisy, chaotic places where gossip and garlic mingle freely, and prices are always up for debate. You're heading to Les Halles, the central market, often called the belly of Paris. And yes, that is both a metaphor and a very real olfactory warning. As you approach, the noise hits first, hawkers shouting over each other, children laughing, a goat bleating somewhere far too close to your ear. Then the smell, meat, fish, spices, bodies, cheese, not stolen this time, and something you can only describe as optimism gone off. You plunge in anyway. Stalls crowd together under sagging canopies. There's no organization, just clumps of chaos. Poultry next to parchment. Herbs beside hogs' heads. Live eels squirming in wooden buckets. A woman selling pickled plums gestures to you with purple-stained fingers. You buy a plum. It's aggressively sour and leaves your mouth in a state of philosophical confusion. You sort of like it. A fishmonger tries to convince you that the smelt in his basket are fresh from the Seine. You glance at the murky river in the distance and smile politely, choosing to believe him only a little. Amid the bustle, you spot a stall with curious wares, glass jars filled with what look like preserved insects, little bundles of dried flowers tied with wax twine, and a stack of tiny notebooks, hand-bound, with spidery script on their covers. The seller is an older woman with a wide-brimmed hat and a voice like gravel. She tells you her goods are remedies and records, and insists that the notebook you're holding belonged to a monk who tried to live on nothing but nettles and prayer. Spoiler, it didn't end well. You buy it anyway. Not because you believe her, but because the pages are soft, and you like the idea of owning someone's unfinished experiment. As you continue wandering, you overhear a heated debate between two vendors about the price of turnips. It involves at least 3 insults, 1 exorcism threat, and a possibly fictional cousin who once poisoned someone with a root vegetable. Historians still argue whether these market quarrels were genuine or theatrical, designed to draw crowds, boost sympathy, or simply pass the time. Either way, they're captivating. You stop at a stand selling honey cakes, those small, dense loaves that last forever and taste like spiced stone. The vendor throws in a second one for free when you compliment her apron, which says something lewd about monks. By midday, your satchel is heavier than your wallet. You've got cheese, non-stolen, 2 apples, a spool of thread, a scrap of lace, and a suspicious-looking bottle of tooth elixir that smells like mint and regret. You sit on the steps of a nearby fountain and watch the crowd. Here's a nobleman inspecting cabbages like he's choosing a wife. There's a boy trying to juggle live frogs. A nun slaps a pickpocket with a surprising amount of grace. Everything is absurd, alive, and weirdly perfect. Eventually, you rise, stretch, and begin the walk home. The streets are a bit less frantic now, though still speckled with noise and unpredictability. A dog darts across your path. A woman dumps dishwater from an upper window. You barely dodge it. Back at your building, you climb the stairs, boots thudding on the wooden steps. Your neighbor is singing again, off-key, but passionately. You pass the corner shrine where someone's left a bunch of dried herbs and a coin. You do the same, mostly out of habit. Or superstition. Or maybe hope. Inside your room, you unpack your market treasures. The cheese goes into a cloth wrap. The notebook sits on your table like it's waiting for a pen. The honey cakes smell like patience. You light your stubby candle, sit down on your stool, and try not to think too hard about tomorrow. Because tomorrow, you'll probably have to line up at the communal well, dodge the rat catchers, maybe try to wash your cloak in river water and pray it doesn't dissolve. But tonight? Tonight, you have food, and a place to sit, and just enough clean skin left to feel vaguely victorious. Not bad, for someone who bathed in 17th century Paris and lived to eat pickled plums about it. The sun dips lower now, slipping behind the uneven Paris rooftops like it, too, is retreating from the day's chaos. You sit by your tiny window, elbow on the sill, nibbling the edges of your honey cake. It's less sweet than you remember. Denser. More like a snack that doubles as home insulation. Still, it's something warm and vaguely festive, and it helps take the edge off your latest realization: you smell. Again. It's not your fault. You did bathe. You earned that bath with every copper you'd begged, borrowed, and bartered. But Paris fights back. The markets, the tanner's alley, the unidentifiable substance that splashed on your shoes near Rue Saint-Honoré, all of it has seeped into your skin like the city is trying to claim you. And now, as the lamplighters begin their rounds and that peculiar twilight hush falls over the streets, you find yourself back where you started, wondering if there's a better way. A cleaner way. Enter perfume. Yes, perfume. That magical mix of flowers, spices, and optimism in a bottle. In 17th century Paris, it's less about smelling nice and more about masking the truth. You don't wear perfume to entice. You wear it to survive. To pretend. To escape. So you decide to visit someone you've heard of or a woman whispered about in market corners and bathhouse dressing rooms, Madame Charbonneau, a self-declared nose, one of the rare individuals in Paris with the finely tuned ability to create perfumes that don't just smell good, but tell stories. You make your way through winding streets, down alleys that seem to curl inward, toward a part of the city that feels older than the buildings themselves. Her shop is tiny, wedged between a cobbler and a printer, and smells like roses, smoke, and dried citrus. You open the crooked door, and a tiny bell tinkles overhead. Madame Charbonneau is precisely as strange as you'd hoped. Her hair is wrapped in a scarf patterned with pomegranates, her fingers stained with something green, and her accent completely untraceable. She looks you up and down, sniffs once, and says, "You've had a long day." You don't deny it. Her shelves are filled with glass bottles in every color, some shaped like teardrops, others like chess pieces. Dried herbs dangle from the ceiling, and a fat grey cat dozes on a velvet stool, twitching occasionally like it's dreaming of attacking your ankles. She offers to craft a scent to match your week. You tell her to imagine a blend of panic, bread crust, eel slime, stolen cheese, and slight existential dread. She nods, as if this is a perfectly normal request, and begins working. As she crushes lavender, clove, a dried lemon peel, and something that smells like old church pews into a small mortar, she hums softly. You recognize the tune. It's a lullaby, one you heard a mother singing to her child near the fountain yesterday. Perfume, she says without looking up, is not a cover. It's a filter. It lets the world smell you through a dream. You wonder if this entire interaction is a dream, but you're too intrigued to care. She bottles the final mix, a dark amber liquid that smells of smoke and sugar and something faintly metallic, and hands it to you. You dab a little behind your ears. You instantly smell better. Not good, exactly, but interesting, like you just returned from an adventure involving Venetian pirates and a cinnamon farm. As you leave the shop, you notice something curious. People move aside more gently. No one bumps you. A man even tips his hat. Perfume, you realize, is social armor. Historians still debate whether Parisian perfumers had real influence in society or if they were more like sorcerers with good branding. Whatever the truth, Madame Charbonneau has altered your night. You walk slowly now, savoring your newfound mystique. The breeze feels cooler. The city feels quieter. You feel less itchy. Back in your room, you place the little bottle carefully beside your notebook. You make a mental note to write about her tomorrow, maybe in the voice of a fictional character who bathes twice a week and owns matching socks. You eat a piece of cheese, sip water that tastes faintly of metal, and stretch out on your bedroll. Your skin is tired. Your feet ache. But your scent? That's doing some heavy lifting. You close your eyes and begin to drift, only to jolt awake moments later when a cart clatters past outside, its wheels playing a concerto in cobblestone. Sighing, you sit up, remembering one last thing: your neighbor mentioned a tavern just down the block that hosts quiet performances at night. Music. Poetry. Sometimes just a man yelling rhyming insults at chickens. You decide to go. The tavern is dim, warm, and packed with the sort of people who wear threadbare cloaks and speak like every word could be their last. A man on a small wooden stage recites a tale about a haunted butter churn. It's dramatic. You love it. Someone brings you a drink, weak wine, probably stretched with rainwater, and you toast no one in particular. Maybe Madame Charbonneau. Maybe the cheese thief. The crowd applauds as the next performer steps up. A woman with a lyre begins to sing a story, something about love, or lice, or both. Her voice is low and lovely. You lean back in your chair, content, eyelids heavy. The candlelight flickers. A cat prowls beneath the tables, possibly hunting or just being dramatic. And you, reeking of bargain perfume and fresh bread, realize something odd. Today wasn't terrible. You bathed. You didn't die. You smelled like fruit and secrets. You saw a monkey in a waistcoat. You survived Paris. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll smell slightly less floral, your bread will be harder, and your boots will be wetter. But that's okay. You're still here. You wake up with a crust of bread stuck to your cheek and the faintest scent of clove still trailing behind your ears. It's morning again, and Paris has already started its daily racket, vendors shouting about fish that don't look trustworthy, carts rattling by, and a distant argument over what time church should actually start. Today is the day. You're going to try a new bathhouse. Not because you're an optimist. More because your last experience left you mildly haunted and slightly sticky. Plus, you heard about a place near the Seine with a real innovation: heated tubs. Allegedly. You pull on your least damp shirt, wrap your scarf loosely, and set out. The sun is just high enough to catch the gutters glinting in all their questionable glory. The air smells of wood smoke, fish oil, and something sweetly burnt, probably chestnuts. Or someone's wig. The new bathhouse is tucked into a quiet lane, framed by mulberry trees that have seen better decades. The building itself has an almost dignified look. The kind of place where nobody yells at you to take your boots off or dunks you without warning. You enter, hopeful. Inside, the place is warm. Not hot, but warm enough that your breath doesn't fog. The ceiling is low, the wood is dark, and the whole room smells of herbs and candle wax. This is already better. You're shown to a small private chamber, well, semi-private. There's a screen. It's slightly broken. But still, privacy in Paris is relative. The tub is a carved wooden thing, deep and smooth, and you dip your hand in. The water is warm. You almost cry. You ease yourself in, sighing like someone in a tragic poem who just got a letter from home. The heat sinks into your bones. You stretch your legs. Your toes thank you. Your entire spine files a formal appreciation letter. For a few minutes, nothing exists except the steamy haze and the soft gurgle of the water. It smells faintly of thyme. Maybe even real soap. Now, this is what bathing should be. Unfortunately, your reverie is interrupted by the arrival of the scrubber. He's a burly man with a towel over one shoulder and a mustache that seems to have survived multiple regimes. He greets you with the sort of cheer usually reserved for overzealous aunts and moderately aggressive circus performers. Before you can protest, he begins scrubbing. Vigorously. With a brush that may or may not be made of antique roofing shingles. Good for circulation, he says cheerfully, as he removes not just dirt but possibly a layer of identity. You try to relax, but it's hard when you're being exfoliated with the enthusiasm of a carpenter sanding a door frame. Still, the man knows his work. He hums a tune. He tells you about his niece who once tried to make perfume out of garlic. You laugh. You cry. You surrender. After the scrubbing, you're rinsed with buckets of hot water and wrapped in a robe that smells, miraculously, of lavender. You're led to a wooden bench near the fire and handed a cup of weak wine. It's heaven. You sit there, steam rising off your skin, as the scrubber whistles and the fire crackles. For a moment, Paris feels gentle. Historians still debate whether 17th century bathhouses were truly centers of community or just convenient places to get scalded and slightly groped. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. But today, you feel clean. Not entirely. Not medically. But spiritually. Paris hasn't won. Not yet. As you leave the bathhouse, you catch your reflection in a shop window. You look better. Less haunted. Less like you've just fought an eel for breakfast. And that's when the rain starts. It's not a drizzle. It's a biblical downpour. The kind of rain that could rinse a cow. You're instantly drenched. Your lavender scent becomes drowned meadow. Your dry robe? Sponge. You sprint for cover, feet slapping across the cobbles, dodging umbrellas, slipping on a turnip peel, how, and diving under a market awning where a sleepy man is selling roasted walnuts. You buy some out of gratitude. He doesn't ask questions. He just gives you a knowing look, as if to say, "Ah, yes." Another fool who thought he could stay dry in Paris. You munch your walnuts and breathe. The city smells different in the rain, cleaner, somehow. The air is sharp with petrichor, and the grime seems less alive. A stray dog trots by, proudly holding a baguette in its mouth. You nod respectfully. Survivors recognize each other. You walk home slowly once the rain lets up. Shoes squelching. Mind full. You pass the Seine, grey and swollen. A washerwoman waves at you. You wave back. You wonder if she remembers the time you dropped your socks in her rinse bucket. She probably does. At your building, you climb the stairs, pausing on the third to let a goose go by. Your room is warm. Your mattress is lumpy. Your bread is hard. But you? You are clean. You lie down, arms behind your head, and watch the candlelight dance across the ceiling. You made it through another day. You bathed. You live to tell the tale. You have stories now. Smells. Scars. Laughter. And Paris? Paris is still out there, bubbling and steaming and grumbling, but for once, you're not running from it. You're part of it. Tomorrow, you'll smell like damp wood and herbal soap. People will still elbow you. Bread will still be chewy. But tonight? Tonight you sleep like someone who knows the bathwater was warm, the walnuts were roasted, and the perfume lady might just be a wizard. And that's enough. And now, as you let the last candle burn down and your eyelids begin to flutter, let's slow everything just a little bit more. The rain outside is gentler now, more of a hush than a storm. The city still hums in the background, but it's softer, sleepier, like it, too, is finally ready to exhale. Your room is quiet. The floor creaks only once. The wind brushes past your shutters like a whisper, not quite a breeze, not quite a ghost. The perfume from earlier still lingers, barely there, more memory than scent now, and it settles over you like a blanket you forgot you owned. Your feet are dry. Your hands are clean. Your thoughts are quiet. Whatever chaos the city holds, whatever smells, scrapes, interruptions, or turnip-related tragedies tomorrow might bring, they don't matter now. You're here. You made it. And your pillow feels like a cloud that just gave up being dramatic. So go ahead. Let go. Let the echo of the bathwater and the walnut vendor's song drift out of reach. Let your breath slow. Let the world blur at the edges, like a painting caught in the rain. Let your mind wander toward dreams where the bath is always warm, the bread is always fresh, and the streets are always dry. You're safe. You're done for today. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow can wait.